In the hushed archives of American history, few documents reveal a story as haunting as the one contained within a single, forgotten journal. Before we venture further, I'm genuinely curious. Could you let me know in the comments where you're joining this story from today? It's a tale that seems to resonate differently depending on the listener and the hour. In the autumn of 1834, the opulent Street Charles Hotel in New Orleans was filled with the city's most powerful men. The event that evening had generated an unusual buzz, even for a place notorious as the nation's largest hub for human trafficking. What set this night apart wasn't the number of souls on the platform, but the presence of one woman who would soon be known throughout the city as the Sapphire, a name that would linger in the gaslit alleys of the French Quarter for generations. She was said to be of average height, with skin the shade of rich ivory and eyes of a shifting honeyed gold. Her hair, a cascade of dark silk, fell well past her shoulders. The auctioneer, a man called Jonathan Pierce, listed her merely as item 23. But the gathered crowd understood they were seeing something beyond the ordinary, as murmurs spread through the room like a sudden draught. The opening bid was an astronomical figure, enough to purchase 5 skilled laborers. What unfolded next would become one of the most strange and shadowy episodes in the chronicles of New Orleans, a city already infamous for its intricate racial codes and the brutal commerce of human lives. This narrative would entangle influential dynasties, resurrect buried secrets, and ultimately trigger a sequence of vanishings that stayed unresolved until 1955, when a restoration effort at the old Laurent mansion on Chartres Street revealed a concealed chamber. Inside was a worn leather diary, a set of human teeth, and a painting of a woman whose loveliness, even faded by time, appeared almost unearthly. This is the account of Isabella Valerius, known to many as the Sapphire, and the chilling reality behind her disappearance in the winter of 1839. The auction that evening was documented by several observers, including Robert Hayes, a merchant from the north visiting to establish trade in cotton. In his private writings, unearthed from his family home in New York in 1947, Hayes described the scene with clear unease. "I have never observed such fervor among gentlemen of repute," he wrote. "The woman for sale was undoubtedly striking, yet the conduct of those present seemed motivated by something deeper than a simple acquisition of labor. One could sense an almost mystical intensity in their competition. What Hayes could not have known was the intricate history surrounding the woman on the stand. Isabella Valerius had not been born into servitude, nor had she arrived through the usual pipelines of the domestic trade. Ship logs from the port indicate she had come just a month before on a schooner named the Serafina, recorded not as cargo, but as a passenger accompanying a trader called Arthur Lowell. But by the time the Serafina made port, Lowell was deceased, supposedly from a sickness caught in Cartagena during their voyage. With no documentation of liberty found among Lowell's belongings, Isabella was taken by customs agents and eventually consigned to the auction block. This much was known. What remained hidden until the finding of the Laurent journal was why a woman of such evident grace and learning had found herself in this predicament, and why specific New Orleans families had taken such a profound interest in making certain she would never depart the city. Before we probe deeper into the events of that winter, we must comprehend the New Orleans of 1834. The city was then a complex tapestry of ethnicities, commerce, and racial designations, more elaborate than anywhere else in the young nation. After the Louisiana transfer, the city had morphed from a French and Spanish colonial port into a booming American gateway where wealth was amassed in cotton, sugar, and human property. New Orleans had cultivated a 3-caste racial structure different from the strict binary found in other southern regions. Between these groups existed the gens de couleur libres, free persons of color, numerous of whom were affluent landowners who occasionally held enslaved individuals themselves. It was a place of paradox. Cruel slave pens operated just blocks from theaters. Black codes governed the conduct of the enslaved, while lavish social gatherings known as plaçage balls enabled arrangements between wealthy white men and free women of color. Above all, it was a city where lineage and appearance held immense social and legal weight. The distinction between liberty and bondage could rest on a single forebear, a reality that would become pivotal to Isabella Valerius's story. The winning offer that night came from Sebastien Laurent, a rich sugar baron whose lineage had been in Louisiana since the earliest French settlement. Laurent paid the unheard-of sum of $6,500, sufficient to buy a full contingent of field hands for a woman who, by all reports, had no background in domestic work or agriculture. The sale was recorded by Notary Public Henry Beaumont, whose ledger noted something peculiar. Laurent demanded the bill of sale describe Isabella not as enslaved, but as a dependent to be housed in his Chartres Street home. What transpired after Isabella was taken to the Laurent residence remains shrouded in contradictory reports. The domestic staff, questioned years later by a reporter from the New Orleans Courier, remembered that she was treated not as a servant, but as a resident, given a private chamber in the main wing, and provided with attire suitable for a lady of society. Yet she was never observed leaving the estate, and callers to the house noted that Laurent presented her as his distant relation from Martinique who spoke limited English. According to household logs, Laurent's spouse, Geneviève, departed for her family estate in Baton Rouge just 10 days after Isabella's arrival, taking their 2 children with her. She would not come back for over half a year. During this time, Sebastien Laurent shut his Chartres Street house to all guests and managed his commercial affairs completely through written messages delivered by his personal clerk. The enigma intensified when in March of 1835, Dr. Benjamin Carter was called to the Laurent home to attend to Isabella, who was said to be afflicted by a lingering fever. Dr. Carter's medical notes, kept in the records of Loyola University, contained an entry that stated, "Summoned to care for a young woman at the Laurent residence. Patient displays signs consistent with a nervous fever. Though her general health seems robust, what concerns me more is the palpable anxiety in her demeanor. When unaccompanied, she inquired if I was aware of her true situation prior to her arrival here. Before I could answer, Laurent re-entered the room, and she said nothing more on the topic. Doctor." Carter recorded that he prescribed a conventional treatment of rest and elixirs, but also wrote his sense that the lady's condition seemed as much psychological as physical. But he was never asked back to the house. By the summer of that year, whispers had started to flow through New Orleans society regarding the enigmatic beauty in the Laurent mansion. Some alleged she was Sebastien Laurent's natural daughter, others that she was his lover imported from overseas. The most enduring gossip, however, was that she was somehow linked to the Deschamps family, one of the oldest and most reclusive clans in Louisiana, whose patriarch, Philippe Deschamps, had been among the most determined bidders at the auction before Laurent's victorious bid. The Deschamps family had built their wealth in the colony's infancy, controlling enormous sugar estates and, as local law had it, engaging in privateering during the War of 1812. By 1834, they had mostly retreated from public view, maintaining their property on the city's fringe and seldom appearing at society functions. What tied them to a young woman newly arrived from the Caribbean? This query would stay unanswered for more than a century. The Laurent Journal, found during repairs in 1955, gave the first genuine glimpse into Isabella's existence in the mansion. The diary, written in a neat, scholarly script, commenced in March 1835. The initial entries were ordinary, noting meteorological conditions and brief remarks on literature read or food consumed. But as spring turned to summer, the writings grew more revealing. The 14th of April, 1835. He has consented to grant me use of the family library, though I am still prohibited from stepping beyond the interior garden. When I asked why I must be kept concealed, he said only that it was for my safety. From what? He will not elaborate. I start to suspect the tale he told me about my documents being processed is just a deception to maintain my compliance. And later, the 30th of May, 1835, today Sebastian brought a visitor, an older gentleman called Deschamps, who gazed at me with such intensity I felt he was seeking something in my countenance. They conversed in French, assuming I could not comprehend, about the likeness and the lineage. When I later questioned Sebastian about this discussion, he grew disturbed and reminded me of my fragile status. Without papers of freedom, I remained legally his possession, irrespective of my actual history. The journal entries became increasingly anguished, as Isabella apparently started to understand that Laurent had no plan to secure her liberty as he had first pledged. By autumn, she was devising an escape. The 22nd of August, 1835. I have managed to connect with a kitchen girl who has promised to carry a note to the offices of the British consul. If my mother's account was accurate, my birth in London should be enough to confirm my free status. Regardless of my looks, I must move swiftly before he acts on his threat to send me to his plantation if I persist in creating troubles. The next entry, dated September 8th, held a single sentence. It was a ruse. The girl told him of my scheme. I am to be relocated tomorrow. The diary then went quiet for almost a month. When entries started again in October, Isabella was writing from Belle Rive, the Laurent sugar estate 40 miles downriver from New Orleans. Her circumstances had clearly worsened. The 12th of October, 1835. I am kept in the previous overseer's cottage, separate from both the great house and the slave cabins. A woman named Clara has been assigned to attend to me, though I suspect her main duty is to report my actions to the estate manager. I have seen Sebastian only once since my arrival, when he came to tell me that any additional attempts to contact outside officials would result in my being reclassified as a field laborer. The implication was unmistakable. It was at Belle Rive that Isabella's story crossed with another mysterious character in this account, Frederick Cooper, a northern abolitionist who had entered Louisiana society, posing as a physician interested in treating slave illnesses. Cooper's encrypted letters to anti-slavery organizers in Philadelphia, deciphered and printed in 1938, made mention of a woman of unusual situation held at the Laurent plantation, who asserts to have been born free in London to a mother who was herself a free person. Cooper apparently managed to speak with Isabella briefly. During a visit to Belle Rive in November 1835, he wrote, "The subject believes her confinement is linked not to common human trafficking, but to some affair of legacy and identity that endangers powerful interests in this territory. She pleads for help in reaching authorities in London who might have evidence of her birth and parentage." Cooper vowed to look into her claims, but his work in Louisiana ended abruptly in December 1835, when his real purpose was uncovered. He barely escaped the state with his life. There is no indication he ever succeeded in pursuing Isabella's case further. Isabella's journal entries from Belle Rive grew more sporadic through the winter of 1835 into 1836. She wrote of her observations of plantation existence, her failed efforts to persuade household staff to assist her, and her mounting suspicion that her imprisonment had some objective beyond mere possession. The 15th of January, 1836. I overheard the estate manager speaking with a guest about the Deschamps inheritance and the issue of verification, and when they noticed I was listening, they went silent and parted. Later, I asked Clara if she knew anything about the Deschamps family. She turned pale and declined to speak on the matter, saying only that they were not people to be crossed. What link could I possibly have to them? The mystery deepened in March 1836, when, according to the journal, Isabella received an unanticipated visitor. Philippe Deschamps himself, now quite aged, came to Belle Rive without Laurent's knowledge or consent. The 28th of March, 1836. The old man arrived alone, dismissing Clara from the cottage. He inquired about my mother, specifically if she had owned a silver bracelet with an etching of a star. When I affirmed that she had worn such an item until her passing, he nodded as if something had been verified. He then asked if I knew the details of my father's death. I told him what mother had always said, that he was a Spanish merchant who perished at sea before my birth. At this, the old man made a noise that could have been a chuckle or a cry. "Your mother was a cautious woman," he stated, "but perhaps too cautious for your own good." He left without further explanation, promising to return. Though I am unsure whether to hope for or fear such a visit, Philippe Deschamps never did come back to Belrive. 2 days after his visit to Isabella, he was discovered dead in his library, apparently from natural causes related to his great age. His death, however, initiated a complicated legal contest over the substantial Deschamps estate, as Philippe had died without a direct male heir. His closest relation was a grandnephew named Antoine Deschamps, who instantly petitioned to claim the inheritance. It was during this inheritance dispute that the connection between Isabella and the Deschamps family started to surface, at least in the pages of her increasingly disjointed diary. In May 1836, she wrote, "The 21st of May 1836, Sebastian arrived in a condition of great turmoil, demanding to know precisely what the old man had told me. When I recounted our short conversation, he became even more upset. 'Did he mention any documents?' he asked repeatedly. 'Any papers he might have given your mother?' I told him truthfully that the old man had said nothing of the kind. He then searched my room thoroughly before departing, taking with him my mother's prayer book, the sole belonging I had managed to retain from London. Within its pages were my mother's few letters and documents, including my record of birth. I fear I have now lost the only proof of who I truly am." And the diary's final entries suggest that Isabella had started to assemble the truth of her predicament. In an entry dated the 10th of July 1836, she wrote, "I now comprehend why I was brought here. It was never about my value as property, but about preventing me from claiming what might rightfully belong to me. My mother once told me that my father's family had rejected her, but she never clarified why. If what I now suspect is true, then my father was not merely a Spanish merchant, but a Deschamps, perhaps even Philippe's son, and if evidence of such a link exists, it would explain Sebastian's frantic attempts to keep me hidden and classified as a slave rather than a potential heir to one of the largest fortunes in Louisiana." This theory aligned with whispers that had long circulated in New Orleans about Philippe Deschamps' estranged son, Louis, who had allegedly formed a relationship with a free woman of color in London in the early 1800s. According to these rumors, Louis had been disowned by his father, but may have secretly wed the woman before his death at sea in 1816, the year of Isabella's birth. If Isabella was indeed Louis's legitimate daughter, and if proof of the marriage existed, she would have had a claim to the Deschamps inheritance under French inheritance laws that still influenced Louisiana's distinctive legal system. Such a claim would have been revolutionary and scandalous, as it would have meant acknowledging a woman with African ancestry, however slight, as the rightful heir to one of Louisiana's most esteemed white family fortunes. The final dated entry in Isabella's diary was from August 25th, 1836. She wrote, "I have discovered a way. The supply barge stops here tomorrow to collect the harvest. Clara has agreed to help me in exchange for the sapphire pendant mother left me. If all proceeds well, I will be in New Orleans by dusk, and from there I can seek passage north. I must locate those papers before it is too late." The journal concludes there, leaving scholars to assemble what happened next through other sources. According to Belrive plantation logs, an enslaved woman matching Isabella's description was indeed reported missing on August 26, 1836. A considerable reward was posted for her return, but the main search concentrated on barges heading north toward free states. Instead, clues suggest that Isabella made her way back to New Orleans, perhaps intending to search the Laurent townhouse for her mother's papers before exiting the South. A bill from a French quarter shop dated August 29th, 1836, shows the acquisition of women's goods charged to the account of Delphine Lalaurie, the infamous socialite known to sometimes harbor runaways within her extensive network. For almost 2 years, Isabella Valerius seemingly vanished from all records. The Deschamps inheritance case proceeded with Antoine Deschamps ultimately being confirmed as the rightful heir in 1838 after no other claimants emerged with adequate proof of relation. Sebastien Laurent, after an initial vigorous hunt for his missing property, appeared to abandon the pursuit, focusing instead on resolving increasing financial troubles that had started to afflict his once thriving sugar business. Then, in December 1839, Isabella Valerius re-emerged in New Orleans society in a fashion that stunned even that scandal-hardened city. She attended the annual 12th Night Ball at the St. Charles Hotel, the very building where she had been sold 5 years earlier, not as a slave or servant, but as the elegantly dressed companion of Antoine Deschamps, the new head of the Deschamps family. Multiple witnesses described the sensation caused by her entrance. The society writer for the New Orleans Courier wrote, "The mysterious beauty accompanying Monsieur Deschamps caused all discourse to halt momentarily as they entered the hall. She was arrayed in a gown of emerald silk that accentuated her remarkable complexion and posture." Those who had witnessed certain proceedings at the same venue some years prior exchanged meaningful looks, though none ventured to make direct reference to the lady's prior appearance there. What arrangement existed between Isabella and Antoine Deschamps stays uncertain. Some historians suggest he may have bought her liberty covertly, while others propose a more intricate scenario in which Isabella had obtained leverage over the Deschamps heir through discovery of documents pertaining to her parentage. What is evident is that their public appearance together represented an unprecedented violation of New Orleans social norms. Regardless of Isabella's ambiguous racial classification, Sebastien Laurent was also present at the ball that night. According to multiple accounts, he grew visibly agitated upon seeing Isabella with Antoine Deschamps, trying to approach them before being physically held. Back by companions, he left the event soon after. 3 days later, he filed a legal grievance claiming that Antoine Deschamps had unlawfully taken possession of human property rightfully belonging to the Laurent estate. The complaint was quietly retracted within a day. On January 15, 1840, Isabella and Antoine Deschamps were observed boarding a steam vessel bound for England. According to passenger lists, they traveled as Mr. Antoine Deschamps and companion. They left behind a New Orleans already inflamed with rumor and conjecture. They would never come back to American soil, and here the documented history might have concluded were it not for the events that unfolded at the Laurent mansion 2 weeks after their departure. On January 30th, 1840, neighbors noted unusual activity at the normally quiet Laurent residence on Chartres Street. Lights glowed through the night, and servants were seen hauling large chests to waiting coaches. By daybreak, the house stood vacant, with no formal announcement of the family's exit. When debtors arrived days later to inquire about growing unpaid bills, they discovered the house abandoned, though apparently not in a rush. Garments remained in closets, volumes on shelves, and provisions in the larder, as if the occupants anticipated returning shortly. Sebastien Laurent, his wife Geneviève, and their 2 children had disappeared. Initial theories that they had fled creditors gave way to more ominous speculation when in February 1840, the bodies of 2 men were found in the marshland outside the city. They were identified as Laurent's personal clerk and his estate manager from Belle Rive. Both had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, execution style. A police inquiry was launched, but produced few outcomes. The detective in charge, Samuel Peterson, noted in his report that individuals associated with this case appear remarkably unwilling to provide information, indicating that forces beyond ordinary criminal affairs may be involved. The investigation was formally closed in May 1840. For more than a century, the disappearance of the Laurent family remained one of New Orleans' most lasting puzzles. Occasionally revived in periodicals or local histories, but never solved. Then, in 1955, the renovation of the long-vacant Laurent mansion uncovered the hidden room containing Isabella's diary, the teeth, and the portrait. The diary offered crucial insights into Isabella's captivity, but ended before her reappearance in 1839. The teeth, when examined by forensic odontologists in 1957, were determined to belong to a male who had died approximately 115 years earlier, roughly the time of the Laurent disappearance. DNA testing, when it became available decades later, was inconclusive due to the state of the remains. It was the portrait that perhaps gave the most tantalizing clue. The painting, done in the manner of leading New Orleans portraitists of the era, showed Isabella Valerius in a stylish green gown, possibly the same one described at the 12th Night Ball. But X-ray analysis of the canvas in 1968 revealed another image beneath it, a family portrait depicting a man, woman, and young girl. Art experts identified the hidden subjects as Louis Deschamps, his wife, and their infant daughter, based on comparison with other Deschamps family portraits from the period. The existence of this painting strongly supported the idea that Isabella was indeed the legitimate daughter of Louis Deschamps, and thus potentially entitled to the Deschamps fortune. But why was this critical proof concealed in the Laurent house, rather than in Isabella's possession when she fled with Antoine Deschamps? A partial answer appeared in 1975 when a collection of letters was found during the cataloguing of the Deschamps family papers donated to the New Orleans Historical Society. The letters exchanged between Antoine Deschamps and an unnamed correspondent in London between 1838 and 1839 suggested a far more complex scenario than had previously been imagined. In one letter dated November 1838, Antoine wrote, "The arrangement is advancing as intended. I have made contact with the subject and clarified our shared interest in resolving this matter discreetly. She is understandably wary, but sees the rationale in cooperation over continued strife. L remains the principal obstacle, as his financial dealings with my late great-uncle render him particularly resistant to any settlement that might reveal their previous transactions." A subsequent letter from December 1838 stated, "The documents have been authenticated by my solicitor. There can be no question as to their genuineness or their legal consequences. Had these papers emerged during the inheritance proceedings, the result would have been vastly different. However, our present arrangement satisfies all parties. She gains her freedom and a suitable compensation, while the family evades both scandal and financial reorganization. L alone remains unappeased, but I believe his economic situation will eventually compel his cooperation." These cryptic communications suggested that Antoine Deschamps had uncovered proof of Isabella's legitimate claim to the Deschamps inheritance, but had offered her a private settlement, likely including her liberty and financial remuneration, in exchange for her silence and cooperation in keeping the matter from public view. This arrangement would have safeguarded the Deschamps family reputation while satisfying Isabella's most immediate desire for freedom. But Sébastien Laurent, having paid a huge sum for Isabella and perhaps being aware of financial irregularities in old Deschamps dealings, was not included in this arrangement. The letters imply that he posed a continuing danger to the resolution, perhaps through his knowledge of the situation or through legal claims he might make regarding Isabella's status. The final letter in the collection, dated January 1840, shortly before the Laurent family's disappearance, contained only a brief message. The problem has resolved itself in a most unforeseen way. I believe no further action will be needed on your part. We depart as scheduled on the 15th. What exactly occurred in those early January days of 1840? No conclusive evidence has ever surfaced, but historians and criminal investigators who have scrutinized the case have constructed a plausible sequence of events. Upon seeing Isabella at the 12th night ball, Sébastien Laurent realized that his valuable property had not only escaped, but had formed an alliance with Antoine Deschamps. Desperate both financially and to preserve his social position, Laurent may have attempted blackmail, threatening to expose whatever arrangement had been made regarding the Deschamps' inheritance. Antoine and Isabella, preparing to leave for England, would have had strong incentive to ensure Laurent's silence. The timing of their departure on January 15th and the Laurent family's disappearance just 15 days later suggests a connection. The murdered clerk and estate manager may have been eliminated as witnesses to whatever transpired at the Laurent home. The teeth found in the hidden room have never been positively identified, but their presence alongside Isabella's diary and the concealed portrait points to a violent conclusion to the Laurent family's story. In 1961, British police archives were discovered that shed the final piece of light on the mystery. A report dated April 1840 documented the arrival in London of A. Deschamps and companion the First. Valerius noted that they had taken up residence in a fashionable area using funds from a substantial bank draft issued by the Deschamps family's New Orleans agents. They apparently lived quietly in England for several years before moving to France in 1845. French census records from 1850 list an Antoine and Isabella Deschamps residing in Paris, with Isabella described as wife rather than companion. They had 2 children by this time. The family remained in France until at least 1860, after which they vanished from public records. As for the Laurent family, no trace of them was ever found. Their abandoned Chartres Street house stayed unoccupied for decades, gaining a reputation as one of the most haunted properties in a city famed for its spectral inhabitants. Local legend held that on certain nights, particularly during carnival season, the noises of a struggle could be heard from within the empty house, followed by a woman's victorious laughter. The case of Isabella Valerius represents a rare documented instance where the brutal economics of the slave system collided with the complex racial and inheritance laws of Louisiana, resulting in a chain of events that culminated in multiple disappearances and likely murders. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of a society built on racial categorization and human bondage, where a person's freedom, identity, and very life could depend on ancestry and a puso of early appearance. The portrait of the Sapphire now hangs in the New Orleans Historical Society, a silent testament to a woman who refused to accept the fate that powerful men had designed for her. Her diary, with its eloquent account of captivity and resistance, has become an important primary source for historians studying the experiences of those trapped in the peculiar institution of American slavery. The final entry in the museum catalogue describing Isabella's portrait contains a fitting epitaph. This painting depicts a woman who, through extraordinary circumstances, navigated one of the most rigid social systems in American history to reclaim her freedom and identity. What remains unknowable is the full human cost of her journey. In 1963, during further renovations of the Laurent mansion, workers found a small cavity beneath the floorboards of the hidden room. Inside was a silver bracelet containing a miniature painting of a star over an ocean, engraved on the back with the initials L.D. and M.V. Louis Deschamps and Marie Valerius, presumably Isabella's mother, along with the date the 10th of March 1815, 9 months before Isabella's birth. The bracelet, like Isabella herself, had crossed the boundaries between worlds, between slavery and freedom, between black and white, between the known and the unknown. It now rests alongside her portrait in the museum collection, two artifacts from a story that continues to haunt the collective memory of a city built on secrets. The hidden room in the Laurent house has since been preserved as part of the building's historical restoration. Tour guides inform visitors about the mysterious woman who was once sold at auction in the St. Charles Hotel, her connection to one of the city's most prominent families, and her eventual escape to Europe. What they cannot tell with certainty is what happened to those who sought to keep her enslaved. Like many of the darkest chapters in American history, some truths remain buried beneath layers of time, silence, and complicity. Perhaps that is fitting. In a city built on unstable ground, where the dead rest in above-ground tombs because the water table is too high for conventional burials, some secrets inevitably rise to the surface. Others remain submerged, known only through fragments and whispers, like the sound of distant laughter carried on the warm night air of the French Quarter. In 1947, nearly a decade before the discovery of Isabella's diary, a curious incident occurred that some historians believe may be connected to her story. An elderly woman named Eleanor Vance arrived in New Orleans claiming to be the great-granddaughter of Isabella Valerius. She carried with her a stack of letters reportedly written by Isabella from Paris between 1855 and 1870, addressed to a former house servant from the Deschamps estate who had remained loyal to her. The letters, if authentic, revealed that Isabella and Antoine had indeed married in England, where the racial restrictions that would have forbidden their union in Louisiana did not apply. They had lived comfortably on the settlement Antoine had arranged from the Deschamps estate, raising 3 children who were brought up with no knowledge of their mother's ordeal in America. Isabella had apparently found a measure of peace in her new life, though she wrote of recurring nightmares about her time at Belle Reef and of a terrible necessity that had preceded her departure from New Orleans. Most significantly, one letter dated September 1868 made cryptic reference to the Laurent family's fate. "I am still haunted by what A felt compelled to arrange that January night. Though I know it was deemed necessary for our security, I cannot reconcile myself to the thought of the children. He assures me they were sent away beforehand, but I have no way to verify this, and it troubles my conscience greatly. If they did indeed survive, they would be grown now, perhaps with children of their own, who know nothing of their connection to me, or the events that scattered their family to the winds." Eleanor Vance submitted these letters to the Louisiana Heritage Association for authentication, but died suddenly of a stroke before the process could be completed. The letters disappeared from the association's temporary holdings shortly thereafter, with the official report suggesting they had been accidentally discarded during an office relocation. No family members came forward to claim Vance's effects, and the trail went cold once again. Then, in 1969, a researcher named David Mitchell, working on a comprehensive history of New Orleans slave markets, uncovered shipping records from February 1840 that documented 2 children traveling unaccompanied from New Orleans to Veracruz, Mexico. The children's ages matched those of the Laurent offspring, though they traveled under the surname Valerius. Their guardian was listed as Clara Johnson, a name that appeared in Isabella's diary as the servant assigned to watch over her at Belle Rive Plantation. This discovery lent credence to Isabella's suggestion in the purported Vance letters that the Laurent children had been spared whatever fate befell their parents. It also implied a level of planning and coordination that went beyond a simple act of revenge or elimination of threats. If Isabella and Antoine had arranged for the children's safe passage to Mexico before dealing with Sebastian and Geneviève Laurent, it suggested a complexity of moral reasoning that defied simple categorization. Mexican records showed no further trace of the children or their guardian after their arrival in Veracruz. Had they been absorbed into the local community, perhaps taken in by one of the many French-speaking immigrant families? Or had they been sent further afield, perhaps to Europe or South America, to ensure they could never return to claim their heritage or seek retribution? In the summer of 1972, during an unusually severe drought that caused the Mississippi River to reach record, low levels, a local fisherman made a grim discovery in a normally submerged area near the former site of Belle Rive Plantation. The receding waters had exposed the remnants of an old skiff containing human remains, a man, woman, and 2 adult males. Forensic examination determined that all 4 had died from gunshot wounds to the head, and that the bodies had been weighted down with iron chains before the boat was scuttled in deep water. The remains were too deteriorated for positive identification, but personal effects found with the bodies included a pocket watch engraved with the initials S.L., and a woman's locket containing a miniature portrait of 2 children who bore a striking resemblance to descriptions of the young Laurent heirs. The estimated time of death based on the limited forensic techniques available was consistent with the Laurent family's disappearance in 1840. This discovery provided the most compelling evidence yet for what many had long suspected. Sébastien and Geneviève Laurent, along with 2 male associates, likely the clerk and estate manager, whose bodies had been found in the swamp shortly after the family's disappearance, had been executed and disposed of in the Mississippi River. The careful concealment suggested not a crime of passion, but a calculated elimination of witnesses and potential threats. What remained unclear was the extent of Isabella's involvement in this final brutal resolution. Had she been an active participant in planning retribution against those who had enslaved her, or had Antoine Deschamps acted independently to remove obstacles to their future together? The execution-style killings pointed to experienced hands, possibly men in Antoine Deschamps' employ, rather than the aristocratic heir himself. But the precision with which the Laurent children had been separated from their parents before the killings suggested Isabella's influence, a last act of mercy from a woman who had herself been torn from her family. In 1988, the final piece of the puzzle emerged when an architectural historian researching the Deschamps family estate outside New Orleans discovered a sealed compartment within the master bedroom's fireplace mantel. Inside was a small leather pouch containing a handwritten confession signed by Antoine Deschamps and dated January 28, 1840, 2 days before the Laurent family's disappearance. The confession stated, "What I have set in motion cannot be undone, nor would I undo it if I could. The elimination of Sébastien and Geneviève Laurent has become necessary not merely for my own interests, but for Isabella's safety and freedom. Their claims against her would follow us even to Europe, and L's financial desperation makes him unpredictable and dangerous. I have arranged for the children to be taken to Mexico, where Clara has contacts among the free-colored community who will ensure they are raised in comfort, though with no knowledge of their true parentage." Isabella insisted on this. Mercy, though I argued it creates future risk. I could not deny her this, having witnessed the depth of her suffering at their father's hands. The men I have engaged for the task are reliable and have been well compensated for both their service and their silence. They understand that any breach of confidence will result in their own elimination. The plan will be executed tomorrow night when the household is at rest. The bodies will never be found. I record this truth not out of remorse, but to ensure that should questions arise after our departure, there will exist at least one account of what truly occurred and why it was necessary. May God, if he exists, judge me as he sees fit. The confession was authenticated by handwriting experts as matching other examples of Antoine Deschamps' script. Its discovery settled the question of responsibility for the Laurent killings while raising new questions about the moral complexity of the case. Antoine had acted as judge, jury, and executioner by proxy, ordering the deaths of 4 people to secure his and Isabella's future. Yet in the context of 1,840 seconds, New Orleans, the legal system offered no justice or protection for Isabella. She existed in a society that had commodified her, denied her humanity, and would have continued to enslave her despite her legitimate claim to freedom and even wealth. In 1995, DNA testing was performed on remains from a Paris cemetery, where parish records indicated an Isabella Deschamps, formerly of America, had been buried in 1875. The results were compared with genetic material recovered from the teeth found in the hidden room of the Laurent mansion. The tests confirmed a biological relationship suggesting the teeth likely belonged to Sébastien Laurent, a grisly keepsake that had somehow been preserved in the secret room alongside Isabella's diary and the concealed family portrait. Isabella Valerius Deschamps died at the age of 58, having lived more than half her life as a free woman in Europe. According to Paris church records, her funeral was well attended by family and numerous friends, suggesting she had found community and perhaps even happiness in her adopted country. Antoine Deschamps outlived her by 8 years, dying in 1883. Their 3 children married into respectable French families, their mother's racial background and extraordinary history apparently unknown to their spouses or social circles. As for the Laurent children, despite extensive research by historians and descendants of both the Deschamps and Laurent families, no definitive trace of them has ever been found in Mexican records or elsewhere. They vanished into history, casualties of a system that had valued human beings as property and bloodlines as determinants of worth. Their disappearance represents yet another cost of America's peculiar institution, the orphaning of children whose parents had participated in and benefited from a moral atrocity. The story of Isabella Valerius stands as testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit in the face of institutionalized cruelty. Born to a free woman of color and the disinherited son of a wealthy plantation owner, she navigated the treacherous waters of racial classification, enslavement, and ultimately violent liberation. Her journey from auction block to Parisian salons encompassed the full spectrum of experiences possible for a woman of mixed racial heritage in the 19th century. Today, visitors to the New Orleans Historical Society can view Isabella's portrait, the hidden family painting beneath it, and the silver bracelet that linked her to her true parentage. These artifacts, along with her diary, constitute one of the most complete records of the inner life of a woman caught in the machinery of American slavery. But they tell only part of the story. The rest exists in silences, in the absence of the Laurent family from subsequent history, in the unknown fate of their children, in the gaps between journal entries, and in the moral ambiguities inherent in acts of violence committed in the name of justice when no legal justice was available. In recent years, descendants of the Deschamps family have established a scholarship fund for African American students studying law named in Isabella Valerius's honor. The fund's creation was accompanied by a formal acknowledgement of Isabella's place in the family lineage and an apology for the actions of Philippe Deschamps in denying her father's marriage and her rightful heritage. It represents a small step toward reconciliation with a history that continues to shape American society and its institutions. The former Laurent mansion on Chartres Street, after changing hands multiple times, now operates as a small historic hotel. Guests occasionally report unusual phenomena, the sound of a woman's footsteps in the night, items moved from where they were left, and most commonly a feeling of being watched in the vicinity of the hidden room, which has been preserved as a historical feature of the building. Whether these are manifestations of restless spirits, or simply the power of suggestion in a city steeped in stories of the supernatural, remains a matter of individual belief. What is certain is that the walls of that house absorbed the suffering of a woman who refused to accept the identity forced upon her, who fought, survived, and ultimately transcended the boundaries erected to contain her. Isabella's journal ends with her plans for escape, but her story continued long after those final written words. She transformed herself from property to person, from captive to free woman, from victim to perhaps even avenger. In doing so, she embodied the fundamental contradiction at the heart of American slavery, the persistent, undeniable humanity of those whom the system attempted to reduce to mere commodities. In the end, the bizarre mystery of the Sapphire is not merely a tale of auction blocks and hidden rooms, of forged documents and midnight escapes, of love across racial boundaries, or even of murder concealed by flowing waters. It is the story of a woman who insisted on writing her own narrative in a time and place determined to write it for her. That she succeeded, even at terrible cost, stands as both inspiration and indictment, a complex legacy that continues to resonate in a nation still grappling with the long shadow of its founding sin. As night falls over the French Quarter, and gas lamps cast their flickering glow across cobblestone streets, tour guides still point out the Laurent house to visitors eager for tales of ghosts and scandal. Few among them recognize that they walk daily over ground where human beings were once bought and sold, or that beneath the Mississippi's muddy surface may lie the bones of those who participated in that commerce. The river keeps its secrets, as does the city built precariously beside it. But occasionally, when conditions are just right, when waters recede, or walls are opened, or long-sealed documents come to light, the truth emerges, demanding acknowledgement. In those moments, we glimpse not just the specific horrors endured by Isabella Valerius and inflicted by Sébastien Laurent, but the larger horror of a society built on such relationships. Perhaps that is why Isabella's portrait continues to draw visitors who stand before it in lengthy contemplation. In her golden eyes, expertly rendered by an unnamed artist, one can see both suffering and determination, the vulnerability and strength. She gazes not at the viewer but slightly past, towards something or someone beyond our field of vision. What she sees there, judgment, redemption, or simply the next chapter in her extraordinary life, remains as mysterious as the woman herself. In 2019, a team of forensic scientists and historians used advanced imaging technology to examine the hidden portrait beneath Isabella's painting in unprecedented detail. The results confirmed what had long been suspected. The family portrayed was indeed Louis Deschamps, his wife Marie Valerius, and their infant daughter. More surprisingly, spectral analysis of the paint revealed that Isabella herself had likely been the artist who painted over the original portrait, using similar pigments and techniques to create her own image atop that of her family. The act represented both concealment and reclamation, a palimpsest of identity that mirrored her own complex journey. And so the story ends where it began, with an image of a woman whose extraordinary beauty belied an even more extraordinary spirit. The mystery of the Sapphire may never be fully resolved, but in its outline, sketched from journals and letters, ship manifests and court records, confessions and DNA results we see reflected the larger American mystery of race, identity, and the human capacity to both inflict and overcome injustice. As you leave this account of Isabella Valerius's life, consider that the ground beneath your feet holds countless similar stories never recorded, never discovered, never told. For every Isabella who managed to leave behind a journal and portrait, thousands of others disappeared into history without trace. Their struggles and triumphs known only to a God who, one hopes, kept better records than human institutions. Their collective silence echoes still on warm southern nights when the air hangs heavy with jasmine and the distant sound of riverboats in a city where beauty and cruelty have always existed in uncomfortable proximity. Listen closely, and you might hear them. the voices of those who, like Isabella, refused to be merely what others declared them to be. Their whispers remind us that the past is never truly past, that justice delayed is often justice denied, and that the human spirit, once awakened to its own worth, cannot be contained by any system, no matter how entrenched or powerful. In the words written on the back of Isabella's portrait when it was donated to the New Orleans Historical Society in 1974, remember her not for her beauty, which was remarkable, nor for her suffering, which was immense, but for her determination to exist on her own terms in a world that offered her no place. In this, she achieved what few of any race or station can claim. She wrote herself into being.